Okay, so these are the video comments on the Module 1A Quant exercise. Not a whole lot of depth that I'll give here, more just kind of reinforcing why you need to know this material. So first of all, part one is just looking at supply and demand review. So in general, when we're looking at the supply shifters, you just need to memorize the list of shifters for the 6 supply, the 5 demand shifters, because we're going to need to remember these to kind of tell our stories or explain changes in markets or the economy with a specific vocabulary. So again, I know the readings had some different words for some of these shifter categories, but I would prefer that you just focus on these 11 that I've provided here. Another important issue to kind of keep in mind is that, with looking at problems 3 and 4, we're making as we tell these stories about changes in equilibrium prices in quantities and markets due to whatever and due to shifts in demand or supply using the categories listed in problems 1 and 2. I just want to make sure that you guys are clear that we make a clear distinction between movement along supply and demand, which is strictly due to a price change, versus a shift in supply and demand, which is due to any of those relevant categories, whether they're the 5 demand categories or the 6 supply categories. So again, it's just kind of a language thing. I don't want you to say change. I prefer you to say movement along or shift. And also just keep in mind that when there's a shift in supply, that causes a movement along demand and vice versa. So again, these are kind of complementary ideas that you just want to keep straight as we use this material. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so on these problems, it's just kind of basically an application of the ideas of shifts and movements along. And again, what we want to do is kind of use this practice to be able to describe what's happening in the market when we start talking about or applying the consumer and producer surplus ideas. These changes in producer and consumer surplus are going to be caused by certain shifts and resulting movements along, and we just want to get into the practice of what is the direction of the shifts, changes in equilibrium price and quantity, etc., etc. So again, it's just this is essentially practice from 212, but applying it in our policy class. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so in this case, we're looking at the cost curve review material, and it's really, we're practicing definitions, we're practicing interpretations. Let's see, get the pen. So we have things like marginal cost, identifying a value, interpreting what that means, getting at the conditions of profit maximization. In class, we've already gone through and practiced on a graph how to identify the profit maximizing level of output and identifying the level of profit based on total revenue minus total cost. So again, I would just have you look through this material and just, kind of get a little more comfortable with looking at the implications of price changes, etc. If any of this stuff is not really making sense, then it's important that you come to office hours and get that clarified. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the Module 1A Quant exercise.